And we'll put up a full screen of basically summarizing what is coming out of this S2155 that's to be signed into law today. It includes, of course, increasing that SIFI threshold up to $250 billion, reducing the number of banks that are facing the tougher tests. Smaller banks get relief from Volcker, and also there's some special relief for custodial banks. How important is this for the banking industry?
So I think it is important for these smaller banks. And if you think about sort of the spirit of the changes, it's basically let's focus the regulation on the biggest banks that perhaps pose the biggest risk to the system. That is really the focus. I think for regulators, and now the rules are sort of aligned with that. And then, you know, if you think about some of the negative effects of the regulation, just in terms of cost, that's been a big one, and it's been especially big for the smallest banks that don't have the big base to leverage these costs across. And so I think that relief is important. It does, you know, it does save them some of the compliance costs, but then the other aspect is it makes it perhaps more beneficial for these banks to merge. Technology is another big cost that's, I think, becoming strategically important to all financials over the last several years, and the largest banks have really had an advantage in terms of being able to spend and sort of revolutionize what's happening in their businesses. This will perhaps help the smaller banks have that opportunity to merge and be a little bit more competitive on that front.
And it might not be over. Bloomberg spoke with Representative Jeb Hensarling yesterday. Here's what he had to say about a potential capital markets bill.
I'm trying to work with my Senate counterparts to say, okay, we've got the banking piece done. What we don't have is the capital markets piece. And so that's coming next. And I hope we're going to get this done in the summer, and I'm optimistic.
Neil, do we need a capital markets piece?
Look, I mean, I think we don't need any of this. I mean, to be honest, I mean, it is a good thing, right, that some of the smallest of the community banks, and we're talking about the smallest of the community banks, are going to be getting some relief under this bill. But that shouldn't hide the fact that what this bill does is an entirely unnecessary gift to the larger banks. And it's sort of obscured by the press and by all the descriptions. But you have to look at this, I think, this bill, and sort of amongst the whole tableau of deregulatory scheme that's going on right now in Washington, and this sort of deregulatory zeal when it comes not just to the smaller banks, but to the bigger banks. And, you know, some of the banks that are going to benefit most from this are not the smaller mom and pop under $1 billion in assets. You're talking about relief all the way up to $250 billion in assets.